You don't get to decide anymore. Everything in this relationship, from where you go, when you go, to what you do with your time, is going to be decided by me. I spoke those words. They were clinical and devoid of emotion. I said them not out of anger or passion, but as if reading a carefully considered clause in a contract. Daniel, my 29-year-old software engineer boyfriend, just stood there, camera bag still in hand, his face draining of color. His reaction, the shock, the near absolute silence, was the clearest evidence that I had completely crossed the line of acceptable behavior for a partner. But I couldn't back down. I was tired of competing with an inanimate object, and tired of a life where I felt like the only one who saw the impending danger. I had replaced emotion with the cold, hard logic of an HR professional who had witnessed too many times how an imbalance of work and personal passion could derail a person's life and career. To me, photography was no longer a hobby. It was a vulnerability in his life that I felt compelled to fix, even if it meant tearing our relationship apart in the process. What brought a nearly 2-year relationship to a head in a battle for ultimate control, and what drives a woman to claim total decision-making power over the man she supposedly loves? My name is Amelia, I'm 30, and my work in human resources HR is more than just a job. It's a life philosophy. I view every issue through the lens of stability, risk management, and personal performance optimization. These qualities propelled me to my current position at a mid-size firm, but they were also the slow poison that killed my relationship with Daniel. Daniel, 29, is a brilliant software engineer with a profound passion for street photography, a hobby he's pursued since college. For him, roaming the streets with his camera is how he decompresses after hours of debugging complicated code. He typically heads out around 9 or 10 p.m., when the city lights start to hit just right, and often doesn't return until midnight or 1 a.m. For the first year, I tried to be the supportive girlfriend. I convinced myself that our differences were complementary. But slowly, acceptance morphed into anxiety and resentment. I started tracking his hours, mentally connecting his late nights to his grogginess the next morning. I remember one time I planned a romantic weekend getaway, only for Daniel to spend half the time editing photos in his makeshift darkroom. I began to feel I was competing with an inanimate object, with a passion that took precedence over me. That feeling of abandonment quickly translated into a desperate need for control. If I couldn't manage his passion, I would manage everything else. I genuinely believed I was protecting him from his own selfish and disorganized nature. The defining night was a Tuesday, the first clear evening after a week of rain. Daniel had been buzzing all day about getting out. Around 9:30 p.m., as I was settling into a movie, he started packing his camera bag. "Where exactly are you going?" I asked, looking up from the couch. He enthusiastically rattled off his usual spots. "Probably around midnight, maybe 12:30 if I get some good shots," he said, barely looking at me. To me, this wasn't a shared plan. It was a self-serving declaration of his priorities. I sat up straight. "That's way too late for a weeknight." "You're not going," he laughed, assuming I was joking. "Come on, it's Tuesday. I don't have an early meeting tomorrow." He always rationalized his actions with work logistics, but I knew the issue wasn't work. It was his emotional absence. I used the same tone I reserve for issuing final warnings to employees: calm, utterly non-emotional, and definitive. "I want you to stay here with me, like a normal boyfriend does on a Tuesday night." He tried to defend his hobby, but I cut him off. I delivered the declaration: "From now on, you don't get to decide things on your own anymore. Everything in this relationship, where you go, when you go, what you do with your time, will be decided by me. You've proven you can't make sound decisions, so I will do it for you." It was delivered without a shred of visible anger, like a mandatory policy change. When I told Daniel he couldn't make sound decisions, I wasn't just talking about late nights. I had a long mental list of mistakes I'd had to fix. There was the time he wanted to invest in an expensive vintage lens, and I convinced him that money was better spent on upgrading the sofa in his apartment, our shared living space. I secretly threw away his favorite threadbare camera strap and bought him a new professional one that suited the image of a rising engineer. I systematically weeded out friends I deemed bad influences from his life, excluding only Chris, whom I knew I couldn't control. I had taken over planning all our weekend activities, ensuring he maintained a normal and healthy social life. Every action I took stemmed from a fundamental belief: I was trying to manage him into the best version of himself. I saw his potential, and I felt responsible for steering it. I'm in HR, Management, structure, and ensuring stability are second nature. The ultimatum wasn't a petty outburst. It was a final, desperate attempt to impose structure on a man I believed was sabotaging himself with a lack of self-discipline. For 2 days following the declaration, the air in Daniel's apartment was thick with unspoken tension. I tried to act as if nothing significant had happened, as if we were just in a temporary pause of a petty argument. I fully expected him to apologize, to say, "You're right, Amelia, I'll cut back on the photography." I had a list of acceptable compromises ready. But Daniel didn't give me the chance. He waited until I got home from work. His voice was simple, clear, and cold. "What you said about me losing my decision rights crossed a line I can't uncross. I need a partner, not a manager. I can't be in a relationship where my fundamental autonomy is treated as a problem to be solved." His words hit me like a physical blow. I immediately shifted into defense mode. First, denial. I said I was just trying to help him prioritize better, that I'd had a bad day at the office and hadn't meant it. Then anger. I yelled that he was choosing a stupid hobby over a real relationship. Finally, I tried bargaining. "I'll allow you to have more camera time if you agree to check in with me first." It was that word, allow, that sealed it. Even in my attempt to compromise, I framed myself as the ultimate authority. Daniel just looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw a chilling realization. He knew I was fundamentally flawed. I moved out that weekend. I didn't cry or beg. I maintained my composed, in-control demeanor during my 2 trips out. "When you realize what you're losing," I said, "I'll give you time to think, but don't wait too long." I left my key on his kitchen counter, right in the center, as a dramatic statement. However, I didn't mention that I had secretly copied the key a week earlier. He was always absent-minded and forgetful. I knew he wouldn't change the locks immediately. My initial plan was just to accidentally forget a few personal items to have an excuse to make contact. But then a more insidious idea took root. If Daniel couldn't make sound decisions, if he couldn't survive without my management, I would prove it to him. I would show him that his life would descend into chaos without my structure. This wasn't typical revenge. It was an educational punishment. I would control his life indirectly from afar until he came crawling back, begging for my help. I rationalized that I was still helping him establish a better system. I waited until I knew Daniel was at work, then used the copied key to let myself into the apartment. He always locked the door meticulously. The first time I went straight to his camera gear. I knew he was meticulous with his equipment, so disrupting that would cause maximum suspicion and discomfort. I moved his favorite 15mm lens to a different shelf, re-rolled his camera straps in a non-standard way, and relocated his cleaning kit from the left to the right side of the cabinet. I made small, subtle changes, just enough to make him doubt himself. I even adjusted the clock on his microwave and coffee maker to be just 5 minutes slow, enough to almost make him late for a meeting. I wanted him to feel an invisible disarray creeping into his life, with only me capable of restoring order. After the small disarrays, I decided on a more symbolic and devastating act, destroying his organizational system. I knew he'd spent hours organizing his external drive by date, by location, with subfolders for every project. I connected the drive and completely demolished that system, reorganizing everything into a system I deemed more logical, by subject matter instead of chronology, e.g., black and white, graffiti shots, port shots. I renamed files, adding long, complicated prefixes that I typically use in HR for classifying employee records. I knew this would drive him insane, forcing him to spend hours searching for a specific photo. I didn't steal or physically damage anything, but I intervened in the very process of how he perceived and managed his passion. I even uninstalled all his photo editing software, knowing he'd have to spend significant time reinstalling and restoring custom settings. I was a puppet master ghost, and I felt a cold satisfaction in the knowledge that I could interfere with his life without him being able to stop me. Daniel finally reached out to the non-emergency police line. He described what was happening: the systematic rearrangement, the uninstalled software, the complete reorganization of his photo catalog. I was monitoring his social media via a fake account and knew how distressed he was. He posted about feeling like he was losing his mind and couldn't find a lens he swore was in a certain spot 2 days ago. The officer was polite but couldn't do anything without proof of who was doing it or actual physical damage. He advised Daniel to change his locks and install a security camera. The police's reaction reinforced my belief. I was operating in a gray area, and was untouchable. I'm an HR professional. I know how to navigate and operate within legal boundaries without crossing them. Daniel asked, "What kind of person does this?" I wanted him to choose the paranoia, to have him question whether he was unraveling after the breakup. Daniel acted fast. He found a locksmith and changed the locks that Saturday morning. He also installed a small Wi-Fi-enabled security camera. Once the locks were changed, all mysterious rearrangements ceased. I viewed it as a minor setback, but I learned a crucial lesson. Physical control was impossible, but social and emotional control were still wide open. I shifted strategies. Instead of controlling Daniel's private life, I would control the narrative of his life to others. I would use my professional HR skills to sow seeds of doubt about his mental stability. This would achieve my original goal, proving Daniel could not manage himself without my oversight. If his friends and colleagues began to doubt him, he would be isolated and eventually have to come back to me for rescue. I started by contacting Daniel's fringe friends, those who didn't know the full context of our breakup. I systematically dug up their contact information. First up was Jake, whom Daniel played basketball with weekly. I texted Jake saying I was really worried about Daniel, that he was obsessed with his photography and not taking care of himself. I crafted a narrative of a man in crisis. Jake believed me, at least initially. Then came other friends with the same story. Daniel was spiraling out of control, using photography as an unhealthy escape and cutting off people who care, meaning me. I cleverly took facts, his late nights, his dedication to the hobby, and twisted them into evidence of a mental breakdown. I positioned myself as the only person who saw the truth of his mental state. To outsiders, my concern sounded reasonable, even sweet. I was controlling the narrative. My campaign escalated when I targeted Daniel's workplace. I knew that if I could undermine his professional credibility, I would inflict the most damage. I emailed Sarah, a colleague of Daniel's. I introduced myself as his concerned girlfriend. The email was professionally written, using HR language. I'm genuinely concerned about his wellness, and he's become unhealthily fixated on his photography hobby, and I worry this is impacting his professional life. But the real move was emailing Tom, Daniel's project manager. I used a personal Gmail address but posed as an HR friend who understands these situations and knows the warning signs of someone struggling with work-life balance. Suggested that Daniel's recent personal issues might be affecting his work quality and suggested they spot check his assignments. I used my HR knowledge to legally sow the seeds of doubt about a person's stability without crossing the line into outright slander. This was not a messy, emotional reaction. It was a calculated professional move. When Daniel got a subtle check-in call from Tom, he snapped. He called me, and I had been waiting for that call. I answered immediately with a saccharine, worried tone. Daniel, I was hoping you'd call. I've been so worried about you. He demanded I stop. Stop the games, Amelia. Why are you contacting my friends and my colleagues? I responded with self-righteousness and condescension. I'm only contacting people who care about you, because clearly you aren't taking care of yourself. Someone has to. You're spiraling out of control, Daniel. I reiterated all my accusations, his late-night shoots, his cutting off those who care. He tried to reason, arguing that photography was just his hobby, something he had before we met. I countered that it had become an obsession, and without me to keep him grounded, he was adrift. My tone was patronizing. He finally warned me, stop contacting people in my life. I mean it, Amelia. I scoffed. Or what? You'll call the police and tell them what? That someone who loves you is worried about your health? I hung up before he could answer. My final act was a public intervention, a desperate last attempt to prove my point in front of witnesses. I drove to the community darkroom where Daniel often developed film. I knew he'd be there on a Saturday afternoon, completely absorbed in his work. I caused a scene at the front desk, telling the darkroom manager, Lisa, that I was his girlfriend and there was an emergency. Lisa was flustered enough to interrupt Daniel. I walked right into the main workspace where about 6 other photographers were working in silence. I called his name. When he emerged, I started. It was a full-blown public intervention with a barrage of accusations. Look at yourself, Daniel. You're hiding in a dark room on a Saturday afternoon instead of dealing with your issues. You cut off everyone who cares. You're so obsessed with photography that you can't maintain relationships. This is not healthy. Another photographer told me to lower my voice, and I turned on him, calling them enablers of Daniel's poor choices. I insisted we were just on a break, not broken up. It was then I revealed the truth. In my mind, we had never truly broken up. He was just having an episode that I needed to manage. I continued arguing wildly. Just as I was yelling that he had ruined my reputation by lying to our friends, the police arrived. Lisa had called them when I forced my way past the reception desk. The police didn't arrest me, but they escorted me out and banned me from the studio. Daniel gave them the full account: the secret key, the apartment break-ins, the contact with friends and colleagues, and finally the appearance at his place of hobby. The officer advised him to file for a restraining order, stating that my behavior had a clear pattern of escalation. I had made myself public, and in the eyes of others, I had fully transitioned into an unstable harasser. The irony was devastating. I tried to prove he was out of control, but in the end, I was the one who had completely lost control of my own actions. A year later, the restraining order was approved. I am prohibited from contacting Daniel, going to his workplace or home, or contacting his friends or family about him. Daniel won, not because he was stronger, but because he was fiercely protective of his own autonomy. As for me, the incident derailed my career in HR. I had to explain my behavior to an ethics board at my company for using HR tactics in a smear campaign. I was severely reprimanded. I lost Daniel, and I lost my professional standing. But after all this, there is one bitter truth I have to face. Daniel was right. He did go out on that Tuesday night, after we broke up, and he did get amazing shots of the late-night food trucks downtown. He submitted them to a local photography contest, and more importantly, he was creating something meaningful without me. He finally felt like he could breathe. I had to move to a different city and find work in a completely new field. I started therapy to understand my controlling behavior. I realized I wasn't Daniel's savior. I was a toxic relationship manager who had turned love into surveillance. My most expensive lesson learned is this: sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who truly believe they are saving you.